Thanks everybody for joining today. Thanks Dan for having me as well. Dan is a good guy. I've known Dan for a while, so you got a great leader as well as the other guys as well that are leading the group. They're all good guys. So today what we're going to be doing is, as Dan mentioned, a focus on digital storytelling within Power BI, and we're going to be specifically looking at the feature set within Power BI that allow you and help you to be able to tell stories with Power BI. Now, obviously, within an hour, we could spend a week trying to really fine-tune something. So we're really going to be focused more on the features. And then Dan actually brought up a few moments ago the pre-cons that are at Past Summit. I'm actually going to be doing one as well. So the pre-con that I'm going to be doing is you're getting a little taste of it, and actually I won't even be showing this example in the pre-con because we're going to be going much deeper into several different examples. But I'm going to be doing by the same title, it's Digital Storytelling with Power BI, with some data sets that I've never shown before. So we're going to actually have some interesting data sets that we show in the pre-con. There's 3 different speakers, and part of the reason why we actually decided to bring multiple speakers is because we wanted to include kind of a make it real time of the day. And so if you're interested in learning more about the topic that I'm going to show you today, then I would highly recommend, if you're going to Past Summit, that you register for our pre-con. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through several different examples of really beginning to end storytelling, not only looking at the features, but some specific design aspects that would really help you with making your reports and dashboards do more storytelling capabilities. And then what we're going to end the day with is a little bit of a make it real session, where the benefit of having 3 instructors really comes in, where we are going to actually have you guys, if you are allowed to, of course, bring your own data, and then have myself, Brian, and Mitchell, the other speaker here, be able to work with you and go around the room and have us focus with and answer some one-on-one questions. So I think we're doing something hopefully a little bit more unique than you would traditionally get with the past pre-cons, and we're really excited about that. So hopefully if you are going to Past Summit that you're interested in this topic, just because you attended this 1-hour webinar, you're likely not to see anything in the pre-con that I have covered today, because we're going to do several different examples that I'm not showing today. All right, so again, my name is Devin Knight. A little briefly here about myself. I am the training director here at Pragmatic Works. So I work for a company called Pragmatic Works. We do now we do just consulting and training. We used to have a software division that actually just recently sold to Century One. Many of you are familiar with Century One, but we continue to do training and consulting. That's not going to go anywhere. That's really what our bread and butter has always been. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, which just means I advocate Microsoft products a lot. And I've written 6 books. I'm about to have, probably by the end of summer, my 7th book. Just had finished the writing stage of it, and I'm releasing a Power BI book. And my goal with the Power BI book is to actually keep it up to date, because as you likely know, Power BI changes so frequently that it's very likely that screenshots that we take with inside of the first release of that book might not be valid later. So we're going to be trying to keep that up to date pretty frequently, but we'll have a Power BI one coming out in hopefully just a few months. I also help run, I used to be the president, but now I'm kind of vice president and help in some other ways, of the Jacksonville SQL Server user group. The reason I put that in here is it just tells you I'm coming from Jacksonville, Florida. I also blog at a website called devinknightsql.com. You may want to check it out later. I do blog at minimum once a week about Power BI. I write a lot about custom visuals. I've been doing a really long series about all of the custom visuals that are available and how to utilize them and make them effective for you. So there's a lot of custom visuals. There's 150 custom visuals you can work with, and I've been going, I think I'm about 100 of them through now. You can also reach out to me via email. You can see on the screen, and I do tweet quite a bit, so you can follow me there. All right, so what we're going to be looking at today is, again, a focus on the feature set. So I'm not going to necessarily make the report background and all those kind of things extremely sexy. I will point you to some areas where you can actually accelerate the aesthetics of your report. There's some good websites out there that have actually built some things called layouts and templates and themes and things like that to really help make your reports look more interesting. So if you, for example, if you've ever seen Microsoft create a report that seems to have all this nice interactivity, a lot of the times they've actually gotten it from this website I'm going to show you. So I'm going to show you that towards the end. But we're going to focus really the majority of our session on the feature set. So we're going to be looking at features like drill through. We're going to look at bookmarks. We're going to look at the selection pane and how that integrates with bookmarks. We're also going to look at a somewhat smaller feature called Spotlight. And then looks like there's one I forgot to put on the list here. We're also going to look at report page tooltips. So we're going to be looking at a lot of different features today to kind of get you an idea of, and hopefully spur some thoughts around in your head on how you can actually make your reports more interactive and really tell a story and allow your users to dig deeper and deeper. So that's what we're going to look at today. So let's get started. First, we're going to be looking at a feature called drill through. Now, many of you are probably familiar with at least the concept of drill through, but the idea here with drill through is that we want to be able to look at a report visual, right click on that visual, and then go to drill down into a more detailed view of that data. And that can be accomplished with this drill through filter. So it actually previously was in the filter section of your reports. So whenever you were looking at a report, if you looked in the filter section, you would see there's a drill through filter, but that's actually been moved. You can see on the screenshot on the right-hand side, I've shown where the new view of it is. The new view is that drill through actually has its own devoted section. This is a fairly new thing. This actually just came out fairly recently that allows you to have its own devoted section for defining how drill through works. They've also done a few things to make it so that your drill throughs automatically pick up any filters that you have in your reports. So that's a feature that was recently implemented as well. But you have the ability to actually overwrite that if you wanted to, so that maybe perhaps it doesn't pick up all the selections and filters that you have in your report. And I'll kind of show you through an example here why or why not you might do that. All right, so before I move on, I can go through all the slides if I wanted to here, but before I move on through the slides, what I'd like to do is I want to kind of show you an example of this, and then we'll move back over to the slides here. All right, so for our example today, I'm going to be using a data set. I've used this one quite a bit, so if you've seen some presentations from me, this won't be new to you. But I'm going to be pulling from data.gov, so it's a government website, and I'm going to be pulling from FDIC failed banks. Okay, so it's the basically all the failed banks that have occurred in the United States over, I think it's since the year 2000, so it's about 18 years. And so I'm going to do a quick search here for the results. Looks like I had this website open on the side here, so it's trying to wake itself back up. Let's try it again. There we go. All right, let's try one more time. All right, so once it returns back the results here, I will pull back a file that's on this web page. The nice thing about how Power BI works, of course, is even though I have data that's stored on this government website, by no means do I need to download it. I can actually point to where this data is stored, where this download link is right here. So you'll find there's a download link here where I could bring in my data from. I could perhaps download that, store it somewhere locally if I wanted to, and then connect to the local file. But really, one of the nice things about Power BI is I don't need to download the file. I can simply right-click on it, copy the link address or copy the shortcut for where that file is located, and then bring that link that's now on my clipboard back over to Power BI. And by doing that, let me go launch Power BI over here. I can then go connect to that data set. And some of these are basic things. We're going to get to the storytelling features here very quickly. I can paste in the URL and bring this into my query editor. So inside my query editor, once I hit edit here, this will take me into a view of my data. And this really is where I can start to work with my data and manipulate it in whatever way I need to. We're going to make a few changes to this before we start to get to the visual capabilities, but I'm going to do this part a little fast because this really isn't the focus of our session, but I did want to kind of show you, for those of you that maybe are pretty new to Power BI, there may be a few of you that have dropped in, that you have a few quick steps on how to get running fairly quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this query or table failed banks. And inside of this result, I want to do a few things. First, I want to maybe remove the columns I don't care about. So for example, maybe I only really care about the closing date, the state, the city, and the bank name. Maybe I don't care about the rest of them. So I'll select the 4 I like, and then I'll go ahead and remove all the other columns to leave me with the things I care about. And perhaps maybe I also want to do something like combine the city and state together. I like that I have city and state, but really when it comes to being able to map and visualize this, I know an issue that I'm going to run into is when I have things like Jacksonville, the city of Jacksonville, where I'm from. There are multiple Jacksonvilles throughout the country. So I really need some way to make it a little bit more specific. I'm going to make this a city-state column. Now, before I merge those two columns together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate them. So I'm going to duplicate these columns. So I have a version of the columns that includes the city and state, and then a version that has them separated that I can work with. So I just duplicated the columns, and then if I want to merge these two together, I'll just multi-select them, selecting city first. That does matter. And then right-click on one of the two and select that I want to merge these columns. Again, I know I'm doing this part a little fast. This really isn't the focus of our session, but it's got to be done to get moving here. All right, so I'll go ahead and tell it that I want to have a comma separator here, and I want to call this my city-state column. And there we go. I could do a few other things in here if I wanted to. Perhaps maybe I want to actually return back just the year. I don't care as much about the date. If I want to do something like that, I can right click on the closing date and tell it I want to transform it to be just a year. And then I've kind of organized this data how I want now. All right, so we're done with this. I'm not going to do a lot more data manipulation on this side. We're going to focus more on the reporting aspects now. So I'm going to take this and go back over to the report view by hitting close and apply in the top left. And this will bring my data now into a data model, a Power BI data model, and I can see it over in the field list on the right-hand side. Okay, and we'll kind of talk through a few of the things that we need to fix as we go through this, but we're going to get started here first with walking through an example of how we can do drill through. Now, for this example, what I want to do is I want to build out a report, and then basically this report is going to be, let's say, at a state level. Okay, so I'm going to build a report that shows me information at a state level, and this is kind of my summary level information, but I want to have the capability for me to drill into a particular state and then have it take me to everything inside of that state. So for example, let's say that I'm looking at the state of Florida. I want to be able to drill into the state of Florida and see all of the cities within inside of that state where these failed banks have occurred. So to do that, I really need two reports. I need kind of a summary report. So I'm going to start with this one, and I'll rename it and call it summary. And then I'll call my next one, I'll create another new report down here. I'll call this one my detail report. You can call it whatever you want, but just for the purposes of demo sake, I'm going to call it summary and detail. Now in the summary report, I said a few moments ago, I want to see everything at a state level. So I can bring in maybe something like a bar chart, and maybe I want to see a count of the failed banks. Let's bring in the count of the bank name, and I want to see it by state. And so I can see here pretty quickly that I'm able to see that it looks like the state of Georgia is the bank that has the most amount of failed banks over time. Now, clearly you can see there's some things in here that are a little difficult to read, so you can always bump up the text size. For example, if I wanted to, I can go into the format section, make sure I have the visual selected, and then go ahead and bump up the text size of that just so it's a little easier to read for the sake, especially of a presentation here. You can bump this up. You can also change the text color. For some reason, Power BI really likes this little off-color gray for some reason. Every time you use something, it has not a pure black, but this off-color gray. You can always adjust things like that if you wanted to. You can go under the format section. I could also look at something like this. Maybe I want to see the number of failed banks by state and year. So I could do something like this. I could drop in the year. Right now it's called closing date, but remember we converted that to year earlier. But I can drop the closing date in on the legend here, and then now I can see the number of failed banks, not only by state, but also by year. Now you'll notice when I do that, it automatically resorts the data. For whatever reason, when I drop in the legend, it now sorts it by the state abbreviation. But really what I'd like to do is I want to see it again sorted how it was by default a few moments ago, which was by the count of failed banks. Okay, good. So we've got our first visual in here. We're going to build a few other things as we get going through this set of examples we're going to do today. But for this first one, what I'd like to do is I want to be able to right-click on any one of the states that I have. So be able to right-click on a particular state and then be able to drill down to a more detailed view of the data. So to do that, I'm going to go back over here to my detail report that we created a few moments ago that's blank right now. And I'm going to do a couple things. One, I'm going to bring in a basic table where I can see that information at a detail level. Again, this is more of a detail report, so I'm going to bring in a table. And inside of that table, we're going to see things like the name of the bank would be useful, maybe the city and state, and let's also bring in the closing year. Now, one thing you'll notice when I bring in closing year, you might have already noticed this, but I want to make sure I point it out to you here. Notice that the closing year has this little auto sum icon next to it. And that's what's known as an implicit measure. You have the same thing in Excel. Anytime you work with Excel and you have a number, in this case, that closing date, remember I converted that to a year earlier, so I should have changed the name of it. But because the year is a number, and I'm going to go ahead and change the name of it here, because the year is a number, it assumes that I want to aggregate it. So if I were to bring in the year right now, you'll notice that one of the issues is, if you look on the very bottom, it's automatically summarizing year, which doesn't make any sense. There's no circumstance where I would want to summarize all the year values that I have. So this is something that you'll oftentimes have to fix in your model. It's a pretty easy fix. All you have to do to fix that is you select the year column, go up to the modeling ribbon on the very top here, way up top here, and then underneath the modeling ribbon, you'll change the default summarization, which right now is set to sum. We'll flip that to don't summarize, because there's no circumstance where we're ever going to summarize the year. Now, when you make this change initially, you'll notice, keep an eye on the year column here. When I make this change initially, it actually still keeps it as a sum. But if we were to kind of take this out, or if you wanted to, you could actually just manually change it here. You can tell it that you don't want to, you no longer want to summarize year. And the way it's going to work going forward, anytime I bring that field into another visual, it's no longer going to summarize it. The reason it was still summarizing it in this visual is because we had already started using it that way. All right, now, of course, we could bump up the text size some here. I'm going to do that very quickly so we can get moving on our drill through, but I want you to be able to see it. And then we're going to bring in one other visual here to really demonstrate this drill through. I'm going to bring in a map, just a regular map. And in that map, we're going to bring in the city-state, as well as a count of the failed banks. Now, you'll notice when I do this initially, that city-state is actually not working. It's not mapping anything. It's really churning through here. It's trying to think through and try and find data for city-state. But because city-state was the city and the comma and the state, so those really three things, the city, comma, and a state, whenever it goes to pass this into our visual, it doesn't really understand what it is. It doesn't understand, is it a city, is it a state, or what is it? And so one of the things that we need to do here to define this is we're going to tell it that the city-state column is actually a data category. So you're going to go underneath the modeling ribbon here once more. And when you have the city-state column selected, I'm going to change this from uncategorized to make it into a place. And if I make it into a place, you might think that, well, I'll just make it into a city. But if you make it into a city, the issue that will occur is it's not really just a city, because if you look at the data here, it's not only a city, it's actually a city and a state. So if you use this place field, this is like kind of like if you had dropped in, Jacksonville, Florida into Bing, this is what it would return back, because when you use this place feature. So it's kind of like if you were just to place in a value into Bing, what it would return back. And in this case, if you make city-state into a place and it re-renders those values, it should start to be able to plot out those values very easily for me. And we can see, the Southeast is real heavy on failed banks, but you can, if you're looking at any one particular city, it looks like the Chicago area here is really where the heaviest density of failed banks are. Okay. So we've gotten a decent little report. Again, it's not super sexy. We haven't brought in any additional formatting. We haven't maybe made a background of this. There's a lot of fun things we could do. But for the purposes of what we want, I want to now turn this into a drill through report. And the way that you're going to do that is over in your below your filter section. It used to be part of your filter section, but if you're running the May release of the Power BI desktop, then you'll actually find that it is below the filter section now. You'll see there's a drill through area down here on the very bottom. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that whenever someone goes to interact with all other reports, that they have the capability to drill through to this one. So when you're configuring a drill through, you're going to do it on the report that you want to drill through to. So in our sake scenario here, we're going to bring in the state column. So I have a state column up here in our field list, and I'm going to drag and drop state into the drill through section here. Okay, and we're actually done. That's all we need to do. All we need to do is drag and drop in the field that we want to be filtering or drilling through on into the drill through section. And based on us doing that, we can now interact with the drill through from any other report. So if we were to go back to the summary report, for example, the next time we want to interact with this visual, say, for example, we right click on the state of Georgia now, you're now going to see, which wasn't here before, this capability to do a drill through. And if you right click on Georgia and select drill through, you'll see, in this case, we only have one drill through, but you could have a big list of drill throughs here if you wanted to. And in this one, we're going to select the detail report. And that's going to hop us over to the detail report that we were looking at with it filtered to the state of Georgia. And you'll also notice that it picked up any other filters or selections that we had. How do I know that? Well, you'll notice the year here. Right now, it's also not only filtering on the state of Georgia, but it's also filtering for the year 2009. Now, the reason why it did that is because there is a new property that came out this month, in the month of May. There's a new property that came out in the month of May right here, which, I didn't mean to do it that way. Let's try that again. Right here. It's called keep all filters, basically, is what it does. And what the keep all filters option does is it makes it so that whenever you're interacting with visuals through a drill through, it's going to take any other items that you have filtered on that report. So for example, in our case, on our summary report, I not only selected Georgia, but I also selected Georgia for 2009. If I select Florida for 2010 here and right-click on that and tell it to drill through to the detail report, you'll see not only did it get the Florida item, which we had set into our drill through here, but it also brought through the year along for the ride. The year came along for the ride with it. Now you can turn off that capability if you wanted to. If you want to make it so that it doesn't basically pick up any other filters that are on that page, you can turn off this keep all filters option. And then what will happen as you work with it is the next time you were to right click on something and say drill through detail report, now it's going to include all years, not just the particular year we happen to be looking at. So that's a fairly new feature, just came out this month, that allows you to determine whether or not you want it to pick up other items or just the one that you have that you put into the drill through section. Another thing that they released recently as well is you can do drill throughs on measures as well. So if you have a measure value that you want, say for example, I had a calculation where I counted the total number of banks, you can now do drill throughs on those as well. So you can do drill throughs on measures or on attributes like we're looking at here. The other thing with drill throughs that I really didn't show you yet is in the top left corner here. Up in the top left, you'll see there's this little arrow that was automatically added. I purposely created this report from beginning to end because there's a few things like this that will pop up automatically for you that I didn't do that I want you to know about. Now, if you've worked with drill throughs before, you likely know what this is, but if drill throughs are a fairly new concept to you, this little back arrow was automatically created for me as a back button so that anytime I go to interact with this report, I can hold down Control and click when I'm in the Power BI desktop, and it will take me back to where I was. So I can come here, interact with this visual, and then if I get the information I need and want to go back to where I was, I can click the back button up in the top left, and that takes me right back to where I was. Rather than having to hop back and forth between the multiple tabs, you can choose that route. It's a more interactive way to be able to do that. Now, one thing I often do is I will generally change the color of this because, I don't know about you, but the little light color gray here is very easy to miss. So I usually will select this little shape that's been created here for me, and I'll go over to the Format Shape section over on the right-hand side, and I'll change the fill to something like a more bold red, so it's a lot easier to see. So that way, there's no missing that. You know you have a back button here that I can click and go back to. Now, the other thing that you likely want to do, because you have that capability for a back button, and by the way, you can make a back button out of whatever you want. You don't have to just use the back button that's supplied to you. You can actually build your own back buttons. But if I wanted to, what I probably want to do is make it so that that's the only way to interact with that report. I only want people to go to the detail report when they use a drill through. I don't necessarily want anyone starting at the detail report. I want them starting at the summary report and then working their way to that detail report. It's kind of this idea of a sub-report, it's sort of like a sub-report, more of a drill through where I can go deeper into other items. Now, if that's what you want and you don't really want people interacting with that detail report, what you'll likely want to do is you can actually hide your detail report here. So if you right-click on the report page here on the bottom, you can then tell it that you want to hide the page. Okay, so you can see what happens when you hide it. It kind of goes into this little light color gray view. And it's still visible when you're in the Power BI desktop, but when you go to deploy this to the Power BI service, that hidden report is no longer going to be visible. And the only way that users will interact with it, if that's what you want, is by going through the drill through and then hitting the back button to go back to where they were. Okay, so you can hide those report pages, makes it a lot easier to interact with. All right, so that's drill through. That's our first little feature that we're going to look at. The next couple features we're going to look at, I'm going to show you a few slides for this one, and then we'll show you the demonstration for it. But the next set of features we're going to look at is bookmarks. And bookmarks are essentially like taking a snapshot view, and snapshot's kind of a bad word here, not a bad phrasing here, but you can kind of think of it as a point-in-time view of what your report looks like, not necessarily data, but more the format of the structures of your report. And so basically, you can make a bookmark of the view of your report, make some changes to the report, take another bookmark, and then you can kind of toggle back and forth between the two different views that you have inside your report. Bookmarks work on several different things. Bookmarks work on slicers, filters, and focus mode, see data, spotlight, and sorting, where you can actually take a snapshot or a bookmark at any point in time when you select one of those types of features, like a slicer selection or a filter selection. You can bookmark on any one of those features. We're also, as we look at bookmarks, we're really going to work on this in conjunction with the selection pane. Now, the selection pane, the idea behind it is it allows you to show or hide certain visuals or images or things that you have on your report. And again, you'll use this in combination with the bookmarks. So for example, I might say that I want certain visuals to show on the screen when we're interacting with it in one particular way, but if we click on a button or click on an image or something like that, then it actually changes to a whole nother view of the report. And I'll show you an example of what I mean by that here in a moment. Finally, we'll also take a brief look at this feature called Spotlight. I say brief because it is very quick to show, but basically the idea of Spotlight is the ability to put an emphasis on a particular visual. So for example, you can see on the screenshot on the screen right now is the map has a spotlight enabled on it, but all of the other visuals around the map are kind of de-emphasized or they're grayed out. And that's basically what the spotlight does. You can put a spotlight on a particular visual, and then it's going to set that one aside, or it's going to emphasize that one over all other visuals that you have on your screen. All right, so let's take a look at these set of features that we've just talked about, that being the bookmark, selection pane, and spotlight. Good news for many of you, the bookmarks feature has come out of preview fairly recently. So if you, for example, are using the Power BI report server, the non-cloud way of doing Power BI, you do have the capability of doing a lot of these things now as well. So some of the stuff that I'm going to show you is later. For example, the report page tooltips, that one's still not capable in things like the Power BI report server, but you have the capability of doing it when you're on the cloud. We can talk more about that later if you're interested. But for this example, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off by adding in a couple views, a couple items from our view pane that we need to be able to implement this. And so what you'll do is you'll go up to the view pane up in the very top here to turn on these features or turn on the view to be able to work with these features. So underneath the view menu here, we're going to turn on the bookmarks pane right here. And we're going to also turn on the selection pane, those two options right here, to be able to interact with these two different features. Now you'll notice as you do this that it starts to eat up a lot of your canvas, so you may start to kind of minimize things so that you can actually still see what you need on your screen. But what I want to do is I want to set up a scenario here a little bit for you. Right now, I have on my report a bar chart, and actually for the sake of this example, I'm going to flip it to a column chart because I want to. No, actually, it's required for this example. But what I want to do is I want to make it so that my users, who I have a set of users that have a varying experience. Some of them are high-tech users. They love charts, graphs, gauges. They love looking at data in those different kind of formats. And then I have another set of users that are more old school. They prefer, they actually up until last week still like to have their reports printed and put on their desk, right? Some of you still have some of those folks. And so those individuals, since I just got them into at least looking at reports in the Power BI, they're still they still prefer to see data in more tabular formats. So they want to see data in a table. They don't necessarily want to see it in a fancy chart or graph. And I want to be able to accommodate that, but I also don't want to have multiple variations of a report. I want to be able to have one report that really satisfies everyone's needs. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage this bookmarks and selection feature to be able to really accommodate both of those needs of people that want to see the interesting charts and people that would prefer to see things in more of a traditional tabular format. All right, so to be able to show this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a regular table. And in that table, we're going to look at basically the same data. I'm going to look at the states and a count of the failed banks and that list of states. So let's make that into a count here. Okay, and I know it's really small. I will bump the size up a little bit so that it's not so difficult to see. So let's bump that up just a tad. Not that it's incredibly important for what we're doing. We're more focused on the way this works rather than the validity of the data. But what I want to do here now is I want to make it so that my users can hop back and forth between two different views of the data. I don't want to necessarily take up too much real estate with basically showing the same exact information. I want to be able to place, for example, this visual on top of the other visual, and then have my users the ability to select which one they want to see. Okay, so here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to leave this table on top of the column charts. And then I'm going to go import a couple images that I've created that are basically look like web page buttons, which you can find. If you would like them, I'd be happy to share them with you, but they're really just simple little HTML buttons. You can find any editor online to create them for you. But I have underneath my images section here a couple images that I have created. So let me go dig and find them real quickly here. I have two variations of it, but I have one called a column button and one called a table button, and they're both simple images. And what these images are going to do is look like buttons. And I'm going to use them like buttons once we get done configuring this setting. All right, so I've first brought in my column button. Let me go back and bring in my table button. Okay, and place that right on top of each other. And my goal here is to make it so that my users can click on table, it show them the table. Or actually, if they click on table, it will show them table, yes. If I click on column, it should show them column. So what I want to do what I want to do to configure that is I'm going to use the selection pane. Remember what I told you the selection pane does? The selection pane actually allows you to either hide or show certain items on your report. So right now, if you look at this, you can see that all the items are visible. The way you can tell that is because the little eyeballs that appear right here indicate that they're all being shown right now. But if I wanted to, I could actually hide, say for example, hide the first button and hide the first visual. So right now it looks like I have the column button already selected and I'm seeing the column chart. By the way, you can actually rename these. So right now you can see this is kind of difficult to understand what the difference is between these. The way you can fix the naming convention of these is if you go into any of the items, say for example the button that I have right here, I can then go underneath the format section and I can give it a title. If you give it a title, at least temporarily, so I can call this something like my column button. Let me make sure I type that right, column button. If I type that in, it normally adds a little title to the visual, and you can see that right here. But if I turn that title off, it will still retain the name of that title inside the selection pane. So take a look at the selection pane here now. Now in the selection pane, rather than it saying image, it now says column button. So that's a little bit of a little tip there, at least for you to help you in trying to determine the difference between all the visuals that you have. So I can go through and give a title on every one of these if I wanted to really be able to tell the difference between them. Okay. All right, so I have now hidden a couple items, I've shown a couple items, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bookmark off what appears on the screen right now. So if I hit add bookmark, it's going to create a new bookmark that is basically taking, again, I don't like this phrase because it's used in other ways that don't mean the same thing, but it's basically like taking a snapshot view of what my data, or what my report, what my report looks like at this point in time. I can then rename the bookmark, so I can call this maybe something like my initial view. And then now I can add other bookmarks by making additional changes. So maybe perhaps I switch this up. So rather than seeing the column button, I want to see the table button. And rather than seeing the column chart, I want to see the table. And then I can add another bookmark. And I can call this my table view, like so. Now, the thing we can do now is I can now tell it that I want the button that we're using here to actually leverage those bookmarks that we've created. Because right now we've created these bookmarks, we can toggle back and forth between the bookmarks, which is nice. That interaction that you're seeing right now is just by me selecting the bookmarks, which is nice. But really what I want to happen is to be able to drive that interaction by clicking on the buttons themselves. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and close some of these things out for the time being. And we're going to manipulate the button functionality, or really it's an image. So if I select the image that we have right here, and you'll see on the right-hand side, it launches this format image section just by selecting the image. And you'll notice towards the bottom, there's an option here called action. And what this action section does is it allows you to configure what happens when someone clicks on it. For those of you that have worked with reporting services have this concept of actions as well. It's very similar to reporting services actions in that you can click on now a button and have it do something. So if I turn on action and go into the action section here, I can then expand and change the type of action this is to be a bookmark. Now you'll see there are other types of actions. We'll talk about some of those. The back one, for example, you already know what that is. That would actually make this into a back button. The Q&A one, I'll tell you about it here in a few moments. Let's go ahead and work with the bookmark one. And if we select this as a bookmark type, we then need to tell it which bookmark do we want it to launch whenever we click on it. In this case, we're looking at the column button. So if they click on this, I want it to launch the table view. So what would happen is if I click on this now, it's going to flip me over to the table view of the data. I can then tell it that I want to create a bookmark on this button. So I'll select this button, do an action again, and make this one go to my initial view bookmark. Now, by us setting this up, what's going to happen is as we interact with this, so check this out. And again, you'll notice when you hover above it, when you're in the Power BI desktop, you have to do a control click. When you go to deploy this to Power BI service, you don't have to do that control. You can just click on it. But as I'm in the Power BI desktop, I can click on this and interact with this just like it is a regular button. So it has a nice interactivity here built into it. My users can now choose between the column chart or table without taking a ton more real estate outside of the button space that we see right here. The button's the only additional space that took up rather than a whole nother table showing over here. So it's a great way to save space. It's also a great way to make a more interactive Power BI report. Okay. The other thing that you can do with the bookmarks feature is I mentioned before, you can do things like leverage the selection pane. Not the selection pane, excuse me, the spotlight feature is what I meant to say. So for example, if you want to spotlight something, let's say we go back over to our detail report for a moment, you can actually turn on spotlight on any particular visual. So say for example, I want to spotlight on the map. You can select the map, click the little ellipses that you see just to the right, the top right of the visual, which appears in the top right of every visual. And you can hit that ellipses and then you can select that you want to see this as a spotlight. And when you select that, you'll notice when you select spotlight, everything around it kind of grays out. So it's de-emphasized everything else, and it's emphasizing the visual that you selected the spotlight on. Well, the benefit of that is I can now tell it that I want to create a bookmark on that spotlight. And you can call it, again, whatever you want. I can just call it spotlight example if I wanted to. And now, whenever someone goes to interact with the report, you can initiate that spotlight in some way. So it could be they click on a button. It could be they interact with this in some way. And whenever they interact with and select that spotlight, it's going to automatically generate a focus on a particular visual. So really, the sky's the limit as far as how you can use this. That's a really cool feature. You can think through how you might integrate this into a story that you're telling. Again, I'm focusing more on the features, and then you guys can kind of wrap your story around how these features might work. All right. Cool. The other thing that you should be aware of is you actually do have this option where you can view your bookmarks. If you select view, it almost makes kind of a little, almost like a going through PowerPoint slides basically, where you can select a little down arrow, or I should say right arrow right here when you select view bookmarks. And when you hit that arrow, it'll take you through each one of the bookmarks that you've created. It'll even hop you across multiple pages here if you wanted to. And you can see the report page you're looking at here in the bottom. It actually tells you what report page you're focused on. Actually, that's the name of the bookmark. So that's another little way you can use that. And by the way, you can also do the bookmarks little view from within inside the Power BI service. Okay. Now, on to our last feature. We have just enough time for it, so perfect timing here. The last feature that we're going to look at is actually one of my favorites of the day, is report page tooltips. This is a really, really cool feature. The feature here is basically allowing you to not be limited at all by what you can put into a tooltip. So you guys are probably familiar with tooltips already. Hopefully you are. Maybe if you're not, you just don't know what it's called, but you're very familiar with them. This is a tooltip, and whenever you hover above a visual, and you're hovering above a certain data element like we are, that little hover over or pop-up is a tooltip. That's what it's called. And you've had tooltips for quite a while, but what's changed is you now have the ability to actually modify the way those tooltips look and completely replace it with an entirely separate report if you wanted to. So if I wanted to, rather than seeing this little pop-up that just has some text, I can actually pop up a whole nother report to be able to visualize. Really cool feature. It is, I believe, let me double check. I believe it is still in preview. So let me show you where you can turn on the preview features here real quickly. And I'll show you how I got here once more. Just want to confirm it is still in preview. Yes, it is. So this feature is still in preview. You can find it by going under the options menu, and you'll find the report page tooltip feature right here. It's a pretty cool feature. I did have a small bug with the very first release that came out in April, but it seems like the May release kind of fixed that. So I haven't seen a ton of issues with it overall, and actually it's a really, really cool feature. So again, how I turn on the preview features, you go under File, Options and Settings, and then Options, and then you'll find there's a Preview Features section right here. Okay, now for our example, what I'd like to do is I want to be able to look at this column chart that we're looking at right now, and anytime I hover above a particular value, I want it to actually pop up a map. And I want to be able to see a map pop up instead of just that regular text that we're seeing here. So what I'd like to do is I want to be able to set up a report that has all that information and then overlay or replace the tooltip we're seeing now with the report page tooltip. So to do that, we're going to create another new report. So I'm going to click New Report here. And there's a few things that you'll want to turn on if you're going to use this feature. So if you're using the report page tooltip, the first thing that you'll want to do is you're going to want to go to the report page settings. So right now we have a blank report page here. In fact, I will go ahead and rename it. That's probably a good idea. Let's call this report page tooltip example, just so it's really specific. And to be able to configure this, you first need to go over to the format section of the report page. So we're going to go over to format. And over here in the format section, you're then going to go to page information. And you'll see there's this option here called tooltip. And right now it's turned off. We're going to go ahead and turn on tooltip, which means this report page can now be used as a report page tooltip. That's what the tooltip option does. The other thing that you'll likely want to do from this settings section or the format section is you'll likely want to change the page size. The page size right now is the entire size of a report. So imagine what would happen right now. If I were hovering above this report page here, right now, if I were to configure this, it hasn't been configured yet, we would have another entire report show up in this area. And it would take up the entire design surface, which is obviously way too large. So what we can do instead is underneath this format section, we can tell it that we want the page size to be something more appropriate. So under the page size section, you'll actually see there's even a tooltip size that's been enabled here for you, which is a good one. I usually like to use that size. Or you can select custom and resize it however you want. So you really have the ability to choose the predefined tooltip size like this one, or you can adjust the settings to whatever custom size you want. Now, you may look at this and think, well, that's not really a whole lot smaller than it was before, but it really is smaller. The reason why it looks rather large still is because the page view option that we have set right now, if you go up to the page view option right here, you'll see right now it's set to fit to page, but if you look at the actual size is this is the size that's going to appear on our report. Okay, so not too large. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put back to fit to page just while we're doing our design, and I'm going to bring in a map. Let's bring in a map here. And in our map, this map's going to be fairly similar to the one we did on the detail report. I'm going to look at this by city-state, and I want to see this as a count of the failed banks again. Okay. The other thing that I want to do is I want to have something like a card here, and I want that card to display the total number of failed banks. So I'm going to bring in a card, just a regular old card visual, and I want to see a count of the failed banks, not the first, but a count of the failed banks appear here. I also want to do something like maybe change the name of the title just for that visual, so I'll call this something like total banks. Okay. The other thing I like to do when it comes to report page tooltips is I know I haven't done a ton of formatting like the background colors and things like that, but it's kind of important, or it's really helpful to actually change the background color of these report page tooltips because it makes it pop, it makes it stand out a little bit. So oftentimes what I'll like to do is I'll select the background of my report, anywhere in the background, go over to the format section, and I'll change the page background to something like a light colored gray or something that just makes it stand out just a little bit whenever it's on a white background. Okay, now a couple other things we'll likely want to do is now that I changed the background color to gray, I'll probably want to change the text color on these to something else. So let's do that very quickly. In fact, on this one, I'll actually get rid of the title. So let's get rid of the title on the map. But then on this one, I want to change the color of the text to maybe white. All right, so let's change the data color here to white, and let's change the category color, category label to white as well. All right, good deal. Now, the last thing that we need to do before we can actually utilize this tooltip is you'll see in the bottom right where it previously was where our drill through was, it now says tooltip. This changed whenever we changed the setting on the report page to make this into a tooltip. As soon as we flipped this setting right here, as soon as we flipped this one, it made it so that the drill through capability actually switched to tooltip. So you're seeing down here on the bottom that this now says tooltip. And so what we can do is we can drag in the state column down into the tooltip section, just like we did with drill through. It's actually exactly like we did with drill through. We'll now be able to implement this tooltip on any one of the visuals that uses that field, uses that column. So if I were to go back over to the summary report over here, and if I were to hover above any one of the data points inside of my column chart, we should now see that it pop up a report the report page tooltip that now shows us the information for that particular cross-section of the data. We do have some extra white space in there or gray space in there, so we may want to actually fill in a little bit more area of the report. But just notice as you move around on that visual that the report page tooltip moves with you. So anytime I move here from one state to another, it actually moves with me and hops over to the different area of the report I want to focus on. So we're looking at Illinois, maybe we move to California, it's going to hop over to California. Or maybe I want to look at Colorado. It's actually making it so that I can interact with this report very easily. I'm not even having to click on anything. All I'm doing is hovering above those data points inside of that column chart, and the report page tooltip is returning back the results we would expect. This is by far one of my favorite new features. It's actually really cool how it works as well. Say, for example, I'm working with another visualization here that doesn't include state. So let's have a line chart in here, for example, just to show you how it would work if I did not have state inside of that visual. And I want to see maybe a count of failed banks by year. Okay, check out what happens when I do this. Now I'm working with a visual that doesn't even include state, but remember state was what was on the very bottom of the settings we had right down here, remember? So we had this set up to be leveraging state. But if I were to use a visual that doesn't have state as part of it, and you just hover above it, oh, they actually changed that setting. That used to work on here. So that's an update here. But let me actually show you what's happening here. What's happening is there's a setting inside of each of the visuals. When you start leveraging and using the report page tooltips, there's a setting where you can actually turn off the tooltips on particular values or particular visuals. So for example, on this visual, in the April release, I hadn't tried this apparently in May, in the April release, this would automatically work. But in the May one, they've kind of made a little slight adjustment here. Basically what's happened here is whenever you select the visual and you go look under the format section, there is a tooltip section right here that you can now adjust. Whenever you turn on this feature, you can now adjust the tooltips, which tooltip is shown on any visual that you're looking at. And right now this is set to auto, but I could have it use the report page tooltip example instead. And that way when I hover over it, there it is. I can now see for any particular year, even though there's no state, I'm still seeing a map that's showing me the total number of failed banks for all states and mapping out where they're at. So you can still leverage this even when you don't have in the field that was used as part of the report page tooltip. You can still leverage this and it just will show everything excluding that filter that was in the bottom right of the report. So that's worth noting here. I can actually decide what kind of tooltip do I want. So if I don't like this tooltip on one particular visual, say for example, I don't want to see it on this visual, I can go over to the format section, go underneath the tooltip section that we just showed you a moment ago, and I can either turn this off, turn off report page tooltips, and now when I interact with this, it's going to show me a regular old tooltip like we were used to before. Or the other circumstance, maybe I have multiple report pages that I want to use as tooltips. So right now we're using this one as a report page tooltip, but maybe I have multiple pages here that I want to set up as report page tooltips and choose which one each visual interacts with. So you would actually see all of the report pages that you have set up as tooltips shown here, and you can choose which one you want to apply where. Okay. The last thing I'll note here is you probably want to go ahead and the page itself, like we showed earlier, you'll probably want to hide it so that a user doesn't automatically or accidentally go to just the report page view by itself. You want to make it so they do everything from the summary report and then just interact with the report through that one page. Okay. Well, we got about 5 minutes left here, Dan. So it looks like, do you have any questions kind of queued up that we can start getting to for the last 5 minutes or so here? And while you do that, oh, there's actually a few other things I wanted to kind of highlight here, but I'll bring up my contact info here. And as I do that, there's actually one other thing I did want to show you. I know I mentioned at the very beginning that you've seen a lot of Microsoft presentations that are using this really cool layouts. They actually got these cool layouts from this website. There's actually a few other MVPs that run this website. It's called powerbi.tips. Some of you have probably explored it for their theme generator. So they have a theme generator that you can use, which is a really cool tool. And basically what the theme generator does is you can tell it how do you want to format every one of your visuals. What kind of text size do you want to use? What kind of text font family do you want it to use? What colors do you want it to use? And then it can export a JSON theme for you, which is really cool. So that's one thing that they have on this powerbi.tips website. The other thing that I have noticed a lot of people haven't realized yet is they also have this section for layouts. And the idea behind layouts, and hopefully this report here actually looks pretty familiar to you. This is one that I've actually seen Microsoft show, but it's a way that you can basically make your report pop, right? It gives you the ability to have some background, have some different ways that you lay out your report. In fact, by the way, they actually have multiple layouts you can choose from down here. And then you make this layout part of your report. It's basically like a background and other things that are laid out on the report itself. And then when you do that, you can then interact with and click on things, and it can interact with and change and make it where you can actually use these as bookmarks that hop to other report views and things like that. But the only thing I want to bring up is it's definitely worth checking out. If you go to powerbi.tips and check out layouts, that's a really cool way that you can really spice up your reports. I'm going to be showing a lot more of that in our pre-con that's going to be at PASS Summit later this year. So again, I'll go ahead and bring up my contact info here. So you can email me later if you'd like. You can follow me on Twitter. Again, like I said in the beginning, I'm going to be doing a pre-conference seminar on this topic, but not even showing this example. We're going to be showing 3 different data sets and really showing more of an end-to-end story, not just the features themselves. We will talk about the features, but we're also going to dig deeper into how do you really make a true story out of this. That's what I'm going to be talking about at the pre-con at PASS Summit later this year. So hopefully you guys can join me. In the meantime, Dan, we got any questions ready to go? You there, Dan? Might be your mic muted. It says you're unmuted through GoToMeeting. And if you guys are dropping, I see some folks start to drop. Thanks for joining. I'm going to take a few questions here for the last few minutes. Oh, I see some questions in the chat here. I can see them now. So first question I see is, could you explain if it's possible to create dashboards using the Power BI report server? It says the feature is not available in Power BI report server. Thanks. Yeah, so let's actually, Dan has been answering some of these questions as well, so I'll just kind of repeat some of the answers here. But with the Power BI report server, it does not have the capability for dashboards yet. It's just reports. So you can take a report that you've designed from the Power BI desktop, and I should mention there is a special version of the Power BI desktop that's needed if you're going to be using the non-cloud method. Oh, there you are. We hear you now.
Sorry,
Dan?
sorry. Yep, I lost my microphone. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay. Yep. Did you find the questions, or I can? We do have a few queued up here. We'll try to go through them quick.
Sure. Yeah, I got the one. It looks like you already answered. I'm not seeing any of the other ones though.
Okay. So someone was inquiring: is the report page tooltips, is that available in the service yet? Since it's whatchamacallit? It's I don't think it's available because it's still in testing, right?
Yeah, that's a good. I thought I actually saw that you could, but you might be right. It's worth throwing out a test here real quick while you do the maybe queue up another.
Some of those features aren't always available right away in the service. So
yeah, you're right. They're really choosy on which one. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Another one was, once you create a bookmark, how do you go about updating it if you want to modify it?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so let me publish this out here and then I'll answer that one. Yeah, so if you create a bookmark and you later need to update it, the way you do that, and I'll get this off my screen and I'll show that. There we go. The way you do that is you can set generate whatever change you need, and then over here in the bookmarks pane, there is an update feature. So you'll see the little 3 ellipses here. If you click update, once you've made the change that you want to change, that by clicking that update button, it will replace what the bookmark did before with the new settings that you've adjusted, or the new features that you've adjusted.
Someone was inquiring, when you did that initial, you went out to get this data set and you used the web link. When you do that, does the data actually, is it stored in the file then, or is it still out on the service?
Yeah, so in my scenario, I did an import, so it does import it into the Power BI desktop data model, but you can set up a refresh for it. So this is one unique kind of thing that I had to learn the hard way. When you're working with a web source like that, you still do need to set up a data refresh in the Power BI service. When you use, I think the command and the query editor is like a web.page, I think it is. Let me see what it is in here. If you're using a web.contents here. If you're connecting to websites, you still do need to set up a data refresh. It's not live connected into it, I think is the question though. So yeah, this was
Good.
brought into a data model.
Okay. And then what are the different options right now currently available for sharing reports?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. Okay, so
Yeah, it is.
so there's a lot of options here. Actually, I brought this might be a good way to show it. I actually did deploy out. Let's test. Let's answer that first question about does the report page tooltip work here? It does. Look at that.
Hey.
So the question about sharing. So sharing reports. There's a couple ways, and it depends on what kind of sharing you want, I guess is the first way to ask. Do you want to share with someone so that they can view and interact with the report, or do you want to share with them where they're more of a collaborative user, where they're actually building and modifying things with you? If you want it to be a more collaborative environment where they're working on a project with you, maybe you work with a team of five people, and you all need access to be able to modify a report, then you'll likely do that through workspaces. You'll create a workspace, give other users access to that workspace, and then it's more of a collaborative interface at that point. The other ways that you can share, though, that are less collaborative are you can do things like apps. So I can create an app out of a workspace, and then people can be able to access and interact with the reports. You also have this kind of, they've made so many different ways to share. They also have this kind of standard sharing that you see up in the top right-hand corner of the reports here as well. This is not an app, but you can actually kind of share directly with the user a report and they can interact with it. You can also do the same capability of sharing that I'm showing here from the dashboard itself. So there's a couple different ways. You can go directly to the report and hit share. You can create an app out of it. To create an app out of this, by the way, you would click right here. It looks like I've already done it. So I've already created an app out of this workspace, but you can come up here, normally would say create app. And then when you create an app, it's made discoverable inside of this app section for anyone that you've given access to. That's probably the shortest way I can describe that, I guess. You want to do one more?
Someone was inquiring about your book. So how would they get your Power BI book that you were talking about? Is it digital? Is it an actual book?
Yeah, so it is going to be both. It is going to be by Packet Publishing. So it is not probably visible on here yet, but they're doing a bunch, and here's the scope of this book. It is a Power BI book. It's going to be both digital, and we're going to update the digital one frequently, obviously. The print one will be updated, but less frequently. But it's going to be through Packet Publishing, and I would expect it probably be available on here July or August timeframe. The thing that's kind of unique about it is they're doing this new style book called Quick Start Guides, which are kind of intentionally short books that are not designed necessarily for people that don't know what BI is. We're kind of going from it from the perspective of what business intelligence is, you just haven't used Power BI before. Maybe you've been using Tableau, or maybe you come from more of an enterprise BI background where you've been doing reporting services. So you know the concept of BI and you're ready to just jump in and show me the tool. So that's what the Quick Start Guide is. It's a shorter book. I think it's going to be around 300 pages. But that should be available hopefully in the next couple months, and the digital will be available on the packetpub.com that I'm showing here.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much, Devin. I appreciate you taking the time to present to our community. I know everyone appreciated it. It was awesome content, and really looking forward to your pre-con.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and have a great day, great evening, great morning, wherever you might be. And we'll see you next month. Thanks again, Devin.
Thank you. Take care, guys.